Welcome to Divine Downloads, the podcast where you get both the spiritual and strategic tools to help you create your best life. I'm your host, Cassandra, and today I am so excited to share with you. I feel like one of my own little life babies. Christine Gutierrez. Did I say your last name right?
Gutierrez.
Say it
Gutierrez.
again. Gutierrez.
Yeah, good.
So much sexier. Like she is the author of the new book, I Am DIOSA, which has just been super exciting because Christine was in my Lightmaker book birthing group, feels like eons ago. And I remember when this book was a glimmer in her eye, and to have read it and seen how beautiful it's truly an encapsulation of the work that Christine has been doing with women for years now, both as a therapist and a healer, and someone who really helps women bring back the pieces of their soul and reclaim who they are. Welcome, Christine. It is so excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm so pumped to be here, and I love that we got to have this beautiful personal experience with it, so that you saw from the beginning to now, because it is a process, like with everything. So it's beautiful to have people that have seen it from idea into
Yeah.
form, and how much hard work, and then for it to now be here.
Absolutely. And I think, something that someone who is listening, maybe that's never written a book or doesn't know the process or whatnot, I think sometimes you can read a book and you can be like, did this person just decide they wanted to write about this and like think about this concept? And I feel like there's something so refreshing and so distinctly different when you have a book like this that is truly from, you were doing this work for years before you wrote the book on it. You were in the trenches with women, having this experience with your clients, obviously having your own experiences in life with it as well. And so I think that really speaks to the book. You see that this is not some hypothetical way you could go on this journey. This is really grounded tools that have been used time and time again to help it. And so first and foremost, let's talk about your work and this book. I feel like they are one and the same, really.
Yeah.
Soul reclamation. That's kind of the word that I got when I read the book. This is the journey of soul reclamation, coming back home to your soul. Can you explain what that is in layman's terms to the world?
So for me, one of my big influences is Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. So for those of you that do not know her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves is one of them, and it's fantastic. And I actually got the chance to study with her in person.
Oh, wow.
She's getting up there in her age, and I was like, I gotta get in person before anything happens, God forbid. So I got the privilege to study with her, and part of that was talking about how to reclaim your original voice, but also talking about the dark night of the soul.
Mm.
And for me, there's many different experiences in life that take away a piece of us. And so that can come from our early childhood trauma. That can come from a relationship where someone was being really abusive. That can come from many different moments. And in life, we tend to see this as this kind of, very clinical thing as a therapist. But what I thought was really beautiful is that in the spiritual world, it is very similar in the scientific world. But the way I describe it is, anytime where you've been told you weren't good enough, anytime that you were put down, there's a piece of light that leaves your body, let's say. And if you imagine your body as a vessel, then those little pieces and sparks of light that float away from you, you need to gather them back. And so if you imagine the light as this spark from your soul, then you go on a journey to finding where those sparks were lost. Where in the timeline of your life have you lost those sparks? And how can you go revisit them through journeying, through meditation, through, shamanic exercises, through therapy, to be able to piece back together yourself. And sometimes you come back in an even more powerful way because you put the pieces back where you want them, where they belong. And so soulful reclamation is about returning to that space of your true self, returning to that space of the self that was you before you were injured. And so our instincts are injured, our intuition gets injured, our self-esteem, our sense of self gets injured. And it's our journey as these spiritual beings in this human body to really find those places and love them up as much as we can.
And what was that moment for you, if you had a moment where you realized that your soul was fractured or that you were missing these pieces? Was it a specific moment, or was it kind of a condition of being that emerged?
Yeah, I think that there's two parts. One is that we all have some sort of split the moment we come to this earth, right? Because we become incarnate in flesh. And so, therefore, there's a process that separates the mundane from the spirit. And so that's why, prayer, meditation is so powerful, because it becomes like the invisible bridge to connect back to those worlds. So that's the first piece, is that we all have disconnected in some way just by being born. The second part of that is that how deeply we can remember that we are more than the flesh, uh, is the journey. But what happens is that we have moments in our lives where we are told directly, you are not divine. And so in my case, that looked like, verbal abuse. And so that verbal abuse translated to that you aren't divine, because if someone's speaking to you that way, then how can you be a piece of DIOSA? How can you be a piece of divine? You can't. And so in that moment for me, um, it was that remembering, because I had a very distinct kind of connection to suffering and pain. And I was very aware from a young age that there was a lot of suffering in the world, and I wanted to make it better. So that was my first awareness that something was wrong, that soul or spirit or love wasn't present everywhere. And it hurt me deeply, and I wanted to make a change. And the second part of that was when I directly experienced it in my family home. And when I directly experienced it, now it wasn't just the world out there was fragmented, it was also my inner world. And so then I realized that in both spaces that there needed to be a journey to healing. And so that was the first time I became aware of it. But that obviously continued on, because we have patterns in life. And so once you experience that first, you replay it. And so I wouldn't, after that, it wasn't just one moment, it was many moments. But absolutely, that was the first big aha, which was, this abuse is taking me away from my spirit.
Yeah. And when you work with women, and when women have come to you or to your retreats or your mastermind, what often do you hear from them was like that moment that was like, or like I said, maybe it was a buildup of moments where they decided, I need help, right? Like, I
Mm.
know that this has happened, and I want to heal it, and I don't know how. What kind of moments happen for women? Or, perhaps it's, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, for someone that's listening right now that might be experiencing this, what does it manifest as in the mundane? Like, what does
Oh,
it
yeah.
manifest in everyday life?
Such a good question. I mean, feeling like you're disconnected, feeling like you're hitting a roadblock, a dead end, like you keep coming up to the same road and it's like it's the same thing again and again, feeling like you're not yourself, feeling like um you're not being valued for your divinity, for who you are. So it can look like, a fucked up relationship where someone's telling you, you're not good enough, or you're not enough, or making you feel less than who you really are. And maybe a part of you believes you deserve that, but there's another part of you that knows, like, I deserve more than this. And so there usually comes some kind of point in my clients' lives where they come and say, I'm tired. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I don't want to do this anymore. I want to progress. And prayerfully, if we are honest with ourselves, that we continue to find moments like that. The situations might be upgraded, right, to different kind of levels, but that we will always be looking and seeing, how can I love myself deeper? And so the opposite of that is, all the moments where you're really finding yourself not loving yourself, or someone not loving you. And those are usually the two things that bring people in. I'm really tired of self-sabotaging to myself, whether it's over drinking, over fucking, over, eating, over something, or under, right? Blocking myself off, closing myself down to people, or you're in dynamics or relationships that don't serve you. And so there's those usually are the two ways that people come into me and say, let's do this. Let's go to the root of this. I want to figure this out. I want to make a change.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, there's so many ways that that shows up in our lives. And I think it's so beautiful how our soul's voice, as you call it, um, really is always there trying to like tap on our shoulder and be like, hey, even in those times in our lives where we have accepted less than we knew we were worthy of, or
Oh,
we have
yeah.
sabotaged, there's always been that little flicker, of being like, oh, but maybe
Oh,
and
yeah.
I love how you kind of break it down into three phrases in the book. Phases, not phrases.
Mhm.
The departure from the soul, the initiation, and then coming back to the soul. So, can you just explain us a little bit about what that? I know that's a big process, but can you explain kind of, we talked a little bit about the departure of the soul. So that kind of happens early on when you realize that you have a body, you're not a body, but now you have a body. So there's a split there. And then somehow in childhood, and actually, before we get into this, I want to touch this because I love this in your book because this was huge in my journey. Um, was that sometimes trauma isn't what we conventionally think trauma.
Yeah.
I love that you wrote, like, we all have childhood trauma.
Yeah.
This was a revelation for me in seeing my own childhood trauma and healing it, because sometimes we look and I'm sure you see this in your programs, I see this in my programs all the time, and we like to look at other people's stuff and be like, well, their stuff is so much worse, so how dare I think this is bad,
Yeah.
right?
And I love that you bring that up because it's something that as a therapist, I am trained to validate people's experience, right? Whatever your experience is. And so, in that way, it is very specific to if something hurt you or disconnected you, there's no level, right? Obviously, we know that there's more intense traumas, right? That are
Yeah.
more traumatic in some ways or more shocking. But in our own experience, when someone is going through something, that's very real for that person. And this happens a lot with the white women that I've worked with, where they'll be like, "Well, it wasn't that big of a deal," especially because the clients that I track, I work mostly with women of color, but all women and some men. um, but the people that come to me, the white women that come to me, are people that have experienced trauma or maybe attracted to my work because they're one of the ones that I call the real ones, right? The ones that get it, that have put in the work, and they will tell me things like, "Oh, well, I had a mom that put up my report card, and if it was B's, she would tell me that that wasn't good enough." And I remember being like, "That's some sort of emotional abuse. That's having a high level of perfectionism in your home can be really traumatizing for your self-esteem." "Oh no, but she didn't call me any names." I said, "Yeah, but she was putting something up. Did that experience cause you to feel less than?" "Yes." And that small example was not something small for this person. It was big, and it created a a, a a language internally that was, unless I'm an A in everything, I'm nothing. So eating disorder and so traumas are very different, and traumas are very different culturally as well. And so it's important that we validate every single person's unique traumas and dissect what that looks like for them. And so I love that you said that it was like a revelation for you to realize, wait, it might have not looked like their trauma, right? But in your case, you realize that, wait a minute, this was traumatizing for me. This was traumatizing for me. And that's important that everyone knows you have the right to claim whatever hurts you as traumatic for you.
Absolutely. And I think that is, a lot of what you talk about in the book too, is not being afraid to go into those kind of dark places, to go into those wounds, and I'm a big believer of that too. I like have this saying that, like, if you just like, you can put like pink icing on like a poop cupcake and it's still poop, right? So it's like we have to change the original cupcake and then we can put whatever icing we want on it.
Yep.
But and so much of that is really looking at, well, how did you get to be the way you are? And so many of us can relate to those terms, like, not feeling worthy or not feeling good enough, or all those things. But what my not feeling worthy is, and what you're not feeling worthy is, and what someone else is not feeling worthy is going to be their own little elixir of memories that
Exactly.
created that. So what do you advise someone that is like, okay, I want to go back, I want to look at it? Is this something they can do on their own, or is this something that you only really recommend with a therapist?
So, because of my training, I always recommend people to go to therapy anyway. And especially right now, if you can get, free resources or they have scholarships. I'll give a resource as well for a therapist that gives scholarships for those that are in financial need. But I really do believe that we can do some things alone, but that it doesn't hurt, and it especially helps to have a therapist. And so, in my book, I talk about this is a deep journey. So only go as, far as you can go, or bring the book into your therapist and do these questions, explore these questions with your therapist. Like literally open up the chapter and say, hey, these are the questions that Christine is writing in the book. I would love to unpack these with you. And so depending on how deep it goes and what feelings come up for you, then I would say, be a good steward to yourself and take care of yourself enough to say, this is too much and I'm going to get support. For me, therapy is a perfect go-to. I think everyone should have it in their self-care kit. And maybe it's not something that maybe you go through seasons where you go for 3 months or 6 months or a year, or maybe just do some booster sessions, but I highly recommend having it.
Yeah, I agree completely. Therapy is something that's in my self care toolbox, and something that, especially you talk about in the book. I used EMDR to heal a lot of the trauma in my childhood, and that was through my therapist. And I think whether it's a therapist or it's even someone like a coach, like you and I, having someone else outside of you that can really listen to you, hold the space, and also be really responsible in closing that container when the session ends, so that it's not like flowing over. But I think this is important work. This is important work. And so you talk about and I love this analogy about how our emotional wounds are doors. Can you just explain a little bit more, and how does someone safely walk through those?
Yeah, I feel like they're little portals into information.
Yes, I love
And um if you imagine that every single emotional wound holds information, it holds downloads, it holds powerful kind of keys in order for you to access those doors in your life, right? And so when you look at, let's say, for example, the wounds of abandonment, you're like, I'm so scared that every person that I am going to be with is going to leave me. Then that can potentially be the key that opens up the door to your sense of feeling at home in yourself no matter what. But in order to do that, right, you have to go there. You have to go to that core so that you can explore, where did this come from? How does it impact me? How can I give myself the love that I need in order to establish my own sense of inner security, right? Because the opposite of abandonment would be having inner security within self and spirit. And
Yeah.
so when you do that, you literally are handed a key. And that key will open up a new psychological pathway that will open up literal doors in your life as well, because you start to change things. And when you start to change things internally, you do start to see external consequences of those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the other things I like to remind people, because there is extensive work you can do, like we talked about with EMDR and EFT, and there's all these different modalities and stuff. But this simple act of, I love that visual that you said, like the wound is a portal, the wound is a door, right? If you can see it, and I think even on the level of being able to identify, right? Being able to just identify and say, shit, I totally have a fear of abandonment. Okay. Well, now it's not an unconscious pattern anymore, right? Now it has so much less power in your life, even if you don't know exactly how to heal it. Off the just being in that space of being like, I'm willing to heal this, I'm willing to look at this, it's going to completely change how you dance with it.
Yeah, well, that's the first step, even, right? Like, so even that is part of the healing. And I think people are so focused on the end result that you don't realize that the medicine and the magic is in that journey. It is in the dark womb of change, right? And so it is that space where you become the cosmic child, where you become the baby kind of in the womb of darkness, which is the change, right? It's scary, it's uncomfortable, it's unknown. But when you give yourself the chance to name it, like you said, naming things is important. And as you name it, I also give this analogy to people where it's like, if you have a dirty house, it's easy to see the dust everywhere. You can see it. But when it's your internal psyche and in emotional terrains, it's harder to see it. You see it afterwards in a pattern. And so we have to find ways to kind of uncover and dust off, right? Our bones, our artifacts that are living inside our emotions, and naming them is one way that we can do this. Literally, naming it becomes a powerful tool that you can use forever, and you don't need anyone to do that. You can ask questions to yourself and answer them. You can ask spirit to help you go to those questions. Help me remove the veil over my eyes so that I can see what I don't want to see. Not what you want to see, because that's easy. What you don't want to see.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the
That's the real stuff.
Mhm.
Which brings me to the next one. You talk about, looking at our shadow, and you have this practice in the book that I thought was so interesting, because I don't think I've seen something in this way before, um, called your dark word,
Mhm.
right? Like coming up with your dark word. Explain this concept, if you will, because I think this is going to be really powerful for people.
Yeah, so essentially in the book it's like a spiral shape
Like
of
an
different
infinity.
quote unquote dark words or shadow words. It's in an infinity symbol, and that was my husband's idea to put the the symbol like that. But I have a practice in my DIOSA retreats where you'll get a word. You'll get a dark word, a shadow word, and you will pick it out of a basket, right? And in this case, in the book, you're closing your eyes and you're tracing the infinity symbol until you ask your spirit to stop, just like you would with any kind of oracle card or anything like that. And when you stop, you're saying, it's not to say that you are that, right? And making someone feel like you're this awful person, this dark word, but it can be a word. Some of the words are, crazy or bratty, insecure, right? Not good enough. And so they come face to face with that word and really embody it. In the retreats, we have all sort of shamanic experiences where we're evoking that emotion, and I will become the dark word and kind of speak as the wound would speak, so that clients can
Mhm.
actually feel it on an embodied level. But in this case, you're just connecting with the word, and you're seeing, how does this word show up in my life? What are the ways in which that I've been insecure? What are the ways that I've been bratty? And you embody that and you look at it. And so this process allows you to kind of look at the disowned parts of your personality, which is what Carl Jung would say about the shadow, right? Those are the disowned parts of us, but that still exist within us. They're the parts of us that we kind of push aside because we don't want to associate with them, but they're there. And it's hard. There's still some shadow words that I'm like, I don't want to own that about me because they're hard.
Yeah.
There, the more you do it, you realize you're like, ugh, that one's ugly. That one's not as cute, right? And there will be some that you feel more comfortable owning. You know, there for whatever reason, I heard Gabby once say that she was more comfortable owning the word uh, alcoholic or addict, but not codependent, because codependent wasn't as sexy to her brain. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it's so true, because some shadows are not as cute. You
Yep.
know, being really needy is, you don't feel as like cool, but maybe if it's like, oh, I'm a little bitchy sometimes, maybe that feels more comfortable for you to own that shadow. So what I encourage people to do is also, even if you feel like the word doesn't resonate, play with what that looks like in your life, see what that looks like, and get to know the ones that you really have hidden. Because the more you do that, the better those unconscious patterns will come to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, look at that, even looking at that list and being like, well, what are the ones that I like really don't like? Debbie Ford has a lot of that work, right? Where it says like the qualities that you look at in someone else that you're most triggered by, that you're most disgusted by, are the ones that you've most disowned within yourself. And to really like take a look. And that was really crazy, because when you look at that, you actually see how when I was doing this work, I discovered how sometimes we create our whole life to just not be that word. right? Like we'll just like counter things so much instead of just accepting it so we can come back into balance with who we truly are. And such
Absolutely.
powerful work. And then that goes into you really talking about how our wounds are our wisdom, which is, in a way kind of starting to turn the corner, right?
Yeah. That's when, we talked about those three phases. That's like the final phase where you're really starting to arrive back home to yourself with this newfound knowledge, with the tools that you gained on the journey, with the ups and downs and the relapses and the lessons you've learned from the emotional relapses and the through the trials, you gain new information about yourself. And it's kind of like a spiritual war, right? And so you come out victorious sometimes, and sometimes you don't, but you learn. And as you learn, you apply those lessons in your life. And one thing that I try to tell people is, in a very grounded way, we're always going to have life thrown at us. Like I don't want anyone to see me or read a book and be like, there's just one moment and everything's, good. Do things change? Yes, absolutely. But life still sucks sometimes, you know? And that's important for people to remember too, so that they know even when you return home to yourself, there will still be life. And so, what I rather people focus on instead of being happy all the time or being, energetic all the time is how can I pivot back to center as, in the healthiest way possible, and how can I give myself the compassion, the nourishment, the space to be able to be gentle with myself when life happens. And so it'll help you then be able to return home to yourself in such a more loving way, in such a more grounded way, and in a sustainable way, because when you see that your wounds are wisdom, you give yourself permission to know this is not about eradicating all wounds and making them all go away. There's going to be some parts of you that are always going to be a little weird, a little interesting, a little quirks, and volume too high on certain parts of our personality, and that's okay. But how can we just get better at it in a way that works for us? And so, this is one of my favorite things about 12 steps is not the saying that they say is not perfection, right? It's progress over perfection. And I really believe that that's like the key to this work is progress over perfection. We're going to stumble, we're going to mess up, but let's keep gaining whatever wisdom we can get from our wounds. And when we have really amazing seasons in our life, appreciate them, love them. When we have hard seasons, appreciate those good seasons and sink into them and gain your strength, right? Because remember, you're collecting that light. So in a way, you're fueling up for those moments when you don't have as much, right? Because you never know.
Mhm.
And I know that that's something that you teach as well, because I've heard you mention similar words where it's like, you never know when you're not going to be like super charged up. So when you are, gear yourself up, get yourself ready, do your practices, so that when shit happens, when shit hits the fan, you can resort to that memory bank of that embodied experience of the work that you've done. And wounds to wisdom is this is for me the magic of life, is that we get to be alchemists, that we get to go through things, and that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but that if they happen to you, wow, such incredible souls have come from these experiences. And I pray for a world where we don't have to go through those things, but for now I still know many people are living with them from fucked up childhood. So for that reason, I say let's find medicine from our wounds.
Yeah, I love that. And that's, yeah, the metaphor I always use is life is always going to throw hurricanes at you. So the best thing you can do is make sure your skyscraper is built on a strong foundation, which I feel like is obviously a lot of the work that I do, but is a lot of the work in this book too, is like this is not a one-time process.
No,
This is like a forever process. So you go through it one time, and maybe the first time you do it, you're looking at a bunch of stuff because you're like, oh my God, I haven't looked at this much stuff. But then you just come back to it too. And that's one of the things that I feel like, I know you do this. I say this all the time. It's like when I give any of the tools that I give in my like courses or anything I teach, I'm like, no, guys, don't get this. I still do this,
yeah.
right? Like I still do this all the time.
Maintenance, spiritual
Yeah,
maintenance.
maintenance is so important because there is no, we talk about like the 3D or the 5D or like whatever. You don't get to live in a alternate dream universe. Like, you're here on Earth, and we're gonna have to deal with some Earth stuff. And yes, we're lucky that we have some spiritual experiences that bring us into that oneness and bring us into that bliss,
So, so important.
but the life journey is about that. And I love you, actually, I thought it was really cool, you talk about the body's healing process and relate it to kind of how to your own relapse journey. Like, you give people in the book this little relapse process, which I think is so important, and I'm so glad that you did it. I know that both of us have a 12-step background, me for my body stuff, and you for alcohol, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the things that is that I feel like reminds me of that, right? Where
Yes.
it's like, let's just get back on track. Like, let's not like stay, like, let's not delay in that. Let's just get back on track.
And normalizing what healing really looks like. Because one of the things that I found in my experience was that a lot of mainstream spirituality, it was very much so missing the humanity in it. Missing the part of it that's like, let's talk about the it's not a fun thing to read when you're like, great, cool, I have to still do this, so boring, this sucks, it's dark. Yeah, it is dark. I tell
Hey,
people
you mean
like,
I just can't like
yeah, it's like,
visualize like my pink Mercedes Benz all day,
yeah,
and that's
and it's
not
like, and
what.
that's why it's like so intricate, right? Because it's like we do this manifestation work too, which I really do believe in, and I do that work, and it's important for me to do that because I have to have a vision for what I want
Yes.
if I step into it. But with that said, life is so intricate and psychological meat is needed in order to add to this. So for me, that looked like telling people, hey, I know it's not as sexy to read this. I know it's kind of whack. I know it's boring. I know it's darker. And it's just like my
Not
retreat is dark.
boring. It's
I mean,
darker.
it can be, it can be. You're like, shit, again. But the truth is that that really is what it looks like in real life. In real life, when my clients come back to me, that's really what it looks like. Is again and again and again, they come hitting that same wall until they finally are like, okay, this is going to change. So it does look more like that. And so I wanted also the book to be that way. Well, I tell people this is not a light book. This is not the kind of book you're gonna. It's a lot of work, and it's the same thing when people come to my retreats. I'm like, if you're not willing to like take out your swords and like chop shit down and cry and purge, it's like a spiritual surgery. Don't do it because it's
Yeah.
not a like light thing. But
Yeah.
what you find on the other side of that is bliss and is power and is beauty, and that's something that I pray to be able to. I'm in the middle of that season still where I'm really good at the dark stuff and I'm less good at the joy and the more chill. So some of my work will start to, embody that as well. And I pray that I can have lighter books that will embody that kind of joy and bliss. But what I know for sure is that having relapses, having moments where you mess up, I just want to normalize it. Let people know it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. If you suffer from mental health illness, if you're in a situation that's violent, there's so many factors that are involved. So be easy, be gentle. It's normal. It's all good. And just knowing that is so powerful for people because it validates that they're not alone and that they're not crazy.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it's so necessary. And I really want to talk to you about the kind of the meeting of these two worlds, right? Of this like spiritual healing world, and then we see this, spiritual manifesting world, right? That for me and my experience, one of the things that, like you said, having the vision, holding that vision, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I would spend every morning literally fantasizing, quote unquote, about like my future, because my present was so painful
Yep.
that became like an anchor into some level of hope. And then what I see, as I've gone on my own journey of healing my trauma and really looking at some not fun ish that went down in my life, I've noticed that when I really started to do that work, it was a whole different level of really the manifesting and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because so much of, what there's a lot of like what I like to call like sexy manifesting out there,
Yeah.
where it's, let's, do X, Y, and Z and believe that you can have it and all that stuff. and then some people are doing these, whatever, these manifesting practices that they see on Instagram or wherever they see it, and they maybe wonder, "Oh, like, it doesn't work for me, like, why isn't it working for me?"
Yeah.
And I actually feel like so much of that is actually because if you're not, like, we're never done with this work, right? But if you're not at least doing some of this work, if you're not reclaiming those parts of your soul, if you're not working on healing, it's harder to even get to that space
Oh
of
yeah,
manifesting, right?
absolutely. And I believe that the problem was in the commercializing of something where, first of all, to be fair, Instagram is not the kind of place where you're going to be able to describe everything, right? You
Yeah.
can't describe everything, so you don't have as much depth. That's why having books or being able to have conversations allow you to add more depth to a conversation that's needed. But with that said, there were a lot of books, law of attraction, a lot of things that were very geared on the very practical steps to manifesting something. But it doesn't talk about, the realities of what it takes to do that, i.e., internally, like you're speaking to, right? Like, I got to do the deep work while also maintaining a vision. I did both, right? Like, I was going to therapy, I was doing the hard work, I was trying to get out of an abusive relationship. And I was also visualizing, not the whole time, but once I understood that this was part of it, I would visualize and I would, dream up my business, and I would journal in my notebook. And those journals and all those things that I wrote about what I wanted was a very innocent part of my soul manifesting its vision, my soul vision. And
Mm.
so don't think that that's like some corny thing that doesn't work. It works. It's just simultaneously do your inner work, right? Simultaneously show up to the problems in the world and the problems inside, and visualize what you want, add texture, add depth to it, think, embody, and feel all of those things you want. The two don't have to be separate, they can go hand in hand. And I think the only thing that was missing was that they were lacking that very important detail of that, like the unsexy part, right? For
Yeah.
manifesting, because you're not going to be able to have anything unless you do that or keep it. So, don't don't feel bad if you've been doing that, but just know that you should do the work, and that you can still do the vision boards, write down the dreams. This is such a sacred, important part of the process. It's like an innocent child dreaming of the future. Those visions are what bring changes to the world. We have to use our imaginations to craft a better world. We have to do the hard work necessary to craft a better world. We need it now more than ever. So hold the visions, do the visualizations, but also do the work.
Yeah. And what do you say to the school of thought that's like, well, we always have to keep our vibe high, and we always have to be positive thinking, and we always have to, like, be in our joy, because when we let that, if we let that drop, or we let ourselves go into, like, the funkiness, then we're pushing away that.
I call that a sociopath. I call that a psychologically ungrounded, unhealthy, and dangerous mentality. I think that there's so much toxic positivity, right? I don't know who coined that term, but there's a term that many of us have probably seen if you're in this world, is toxic positivity. And if you haven't heard, what that means is essentially the over glamorization of positive emotions over human emotions. And so they label, high vibe and, constantly feeling a certain way as happy, etc., as good, and labeling human emotions like confusion, scared, fear as bad, which is really, really toxic, because we are human beings that have a multitude of emotions. And so it would be dangerous to deny ourselves the very real emotions that human beings feel, right? And so even if you notice, if you ever met people in the yoga community and they have a very muted affect, and their voice all sounds the same, there's no range in their voice, there's no true emotion of I'm angry about this in the world. That's scary. It's dangerous, And so, don't be scared to be human. What is important in anything, you can manifest anything being human, right? But what you need to do is remember that that framework came from a not psychologically based theory, right? And
Mm.
so it didn't come from a point of view of acknowledging people and inviting people to validate their emotions. It came from a view of, if you're only high vibe, then that's the only way you're going to manifest things. You can be heartbroken and sad and depressed and be in a space of wanting something, desiring something, and still manifest it, because there's a sincerity, there's a rawness. I think that, there's a beauty to being able to acknowledge your emotions without living in that darkness of, something negative or toxic. So, for example, let's say you're single and you really want to manifest a partner, and you're home at night one night and you're feeling really sad. You're feeling sad, you're feeling lonely. That's fucking normal. If you are, you know,
Yeah.
29, 35, whatever the fuck, and you want a certain thing to happen, it's not happening, and you're doing your best, you're showing up every day, you're doing all this work, you're fucking changing furniture in your house so that it matches, you're
Yeah.
writing your ideal list, and then you're sad one night because you're home alone and you're a human and your heart hurts because you're longing. And then someone tells you that because you did that, now you can't manifest. Imagine the pain and the shame that that person would feel, and they might blame themselves and say, well, I wasn't high vibe, I should be only in a state of joy. And that's not the reality. But instead, if we embrace that emotion as a tender emotion that's part of the process, then you can invite yourself back to being like, okay, I'm going to give myself the space to come back and visualize, but also be human. You can still do both, I promise, and everything will turn out great.
I love it. I love it because it's so funny. Ironically, right before this conversation, I did like an Instagram story because this had come up with a couple of my clients yesterday, and then I was thinking about it this morning about how sometimes when we really desire something and we see someone else in the world that has it, or we see it, in the Instagram sphere or whatever, we can feel that level of like sadness or like, ugh, you know,
Yep.
and and I literally said, I was just like, why do we assume that that's bad?
Yeah.
Like, why do we assume that that's bad? Like, what if, you hear that story all the time, like when someone wants a baby, they see everyone with having a baby, and then they're like, oh, babies, right? And it's like, what if that's a beautiful thing? What
Yeah.
if it's beautiful that you're sad on the Friday night because your soul is so ready for your partner?
Because it's a longing. You
Yeah,
know, if you're angry at the way the world is, if you're angry at an injustice, that's beautiful because it means you're alive. It means your heart's beating. It means your eyes are open to the reality. And it means that you have fire to create change, right? If you have too much water, which would be like the sadness, right? And you're feeling like, damn, I really want a baby. And, all these people are having babies and you feel more emotional and watery. It's like, that's beautiful. Um, the difference is living in that and being a hater and being resentful. That's a whole
yeah,
nother story. But no one's
exactly.
saying because you feel something that it's a negative thing. So feel it and allow yourself to also feel. And so if this is a longing and a sadness, it means I desire it. And if I desire it, what would that feel like? So
Yeah.
now you're doing both. You're allowing yourself to be human and you're visualizing. That is the medicine. That's what we need, is the merging of psychologically grounded and spiritual and soulful.
Absolutely. And I think just like you said before, like you can be in any current of the emotions and still manifest. And I feel like because so much of that is my personal belief around manifestation is more about worthiness and alignment than it is about like joy and happiness necessarily. It's like there are some things like everyone that's listening has manifested something already, right? Where maybe you manifested a free coffee because that's like not even a thing for you, right? You're like, well, of course I can get a free coffee. Or you manifest the parking space because you're just like, oh, I can get a parking space, right? It's just become, and so much of that worthiness, right? Where it comes to you after I did so much of this work. And I feel like you have a similar kind of story with both of us called in our soul partners, where it was, it was like an, it was like, well, of course I would attract him, of course I would attract him, right? Whereas if it had been maybe 5 years earlier, I would have completely sabotaged it, right? And not been able to hold it because there wasn't part of me that had done enough work to be worthy or to feel worthy, not to be worthy, but to feel that.
Exactly. And we both had all these moments of like, will it happen? I'm nervous. Okay, of course I think it's going to happen. And I, again, normalizing the process of the waiting, right? It's the waiting. And in the waiting phase and the waiting season, we all are going to feel different emotions come up. As long as we're not being angry consistently for a long period of time and being like, so hard, because of course nothing's going to happen, because if you don't believe you're worthy, then of course nothing's going to happen. But again, that doesn't equate to allowing yourself to feel the feelings. So I love that you said that, because I think it gives people the space to be like, okay, I can, I can be real. I can let myself feel things and simultaneously still envision things. I remember when I gave myself permission to do that, and I was like, me being in this longing and sadness is good, because it means that I know that my heart's awake for what it wants. But I won't allow myself to say, no, you can't have it. And I'm not going to say that I have full faith today. But, when I was in the season of waiting for my partner, but I gave myself the space to say, okay, but I do want it. Maybe I don't
Yeah.
fully believe, but I do want it. Let me work on myself as much as I can to be able to do the work so that I could heal, right? And, get sober and go to deeper work on my emotions. And so I think that uh, it's an important part of waking up to the parts of spirituality that haven't been working, and really integrating more grounded practices that will give people a healthy sense of self-esteem that's lasting and won't shame them for being a person.
Yes, and I think that's the core. That's the core of it. It's the doing this work and this book, and like you said, it is not like, it isn't like a light beach read. This is like a deep soul work retreat in a book. Like, go take it with you to Joshua Tree. Don't talk to anyone for a week, or talk to your best
Yep.
friend or your therapist. But this, it is a work of really looking at yourself and seeing those places. And I think that is something that it's needed times a thousand, because one of the things, like we just talked about before we even started recording, was that people can look outwardly whatever they see on Instagram or whatever they see, and we of a lot of people try to show the full breath as much as we can, but it's impossible. It's
No, and
impossible to
nor do
show.
you want to. Do you know
No.
what I mean? Like it's like, I mean, at least that's not my personality. It never has been. I don't know if it's because originally I was trained as a therapist, or just because of the way I am. Like, I do believe that, the obsession with needing to show everything online is like, we don't have to, right? And so we all know that, hopefully you know this. And if you don't, know it, that every next level requires a next level of work. And that means that you will come across tests, right? Which is like what happens when you leave and you're in the journey of the trials, and you're going to have those tests in every next level. So it's like, be able to know that, and know that, like, don't compare yourself, don't compare yourself to anyone, and focus on the journey that you're having, so that you can be really grateful and also very present to your unique experience. No teacher, no person knows everything. Everyone is just sharing their experience. Everyone's just sharing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And a lot of them work. Find the
Yeah.
ones that work for you. There is hope, right? Like, that's why we do this stuff. But but um but be mindful of the age of social media and healing, and know that, as much as miracles happen, there's also a thousand things that no one knows on the other side of that, in order for us to put in the hard work, right? Like, I faced that too. I was like going through one of the most magical times of my life, engaged, and with my book deal and all these big things that were happening. And I was also dealing with a lot of other emotional wounds that were coming up for me, that were really hard, and that I wasn't able to fully express. I could hint at it, but I couldn't fully express it. And so it's so important to me as a healer, as a person, to let people know, like, girl, like, I promise you, do the work, things are going to get better. And try your best when you're reading a book or you're signing up for a program, to never put anyone on a pedestal. Relate. I love, that's why I was attracted to your work, and why we're having this conversation, is because we both do share, especially in our intimate circles when we're teaching, here's what's going on. This was rough. I'm facing this in my house, or I'm going through this, but I'm here showing up for you. I'm showing up for myself, and I'm practicing what I preach, because I'm going to do something for myself. I'm going to figure something out. And so, be gentle with yourself. Be compassionate. Don't compare, and things get better when you work at them.
Yes, I love, love, love. I mean, I'm so excited for everyone to get this book. And I think, it's so important what you said. I always say like new level, new devil. I don't like using the D word, but
No, good.
you know,
New level, new
that,
devil. I like it.
that's like it's true. And I think that's what is getting this grounded, getting your own. You really, in this book, you give people a process, right? You give people a process to work through. And even if people use this process as a jump off point, right, as saying like, these are the tools that I went through all of them, these are the ones that really like helped me get a aha or shift, right? And like, keep these in your back pocket, right? And know that, okay, just exactly like you said, every new up leveling, every time you're like, okay, so first you're like, I want to get this place in my career, then you get there, then you're like, oh wow, now's all this stuff I have to deal with here. And then
Yeah,
go back to that. And I think
that's
that
right.
is actually part of having a healthy sense of self-esteem and a healthy centered balance, is not making that mean that anything is wrong with you,
That's right.
right?
That's right. Normalizing that you are right on track. If you can accept that even when life looks like it's throwing you off, it's not. It's exactly that, is that you are just upgrading. And so in order to do that, your shell has to expand. And your shell usually expands in physical incarnation by facing challenges to overcome them and gain access to the next level of you, the next level of your destiny, right? Your soul's destiny expansion. And in that little period, that in between, it can be tough. But then afterwards, there's always inevitably something that shifts to make it better. Always, as long as you learn what you need to learn.
Absolutely. And enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
Finding, I like to call it like, that's why when I think about the word that I like to describe my life, I like to think of as juicy, because I feel like juicy just means you get like to experience the whole roller coaster, right? And when you like made that comment about kind of like the monotone, like sage yogi person, right? It's like they're not riding the like that's not to me a juicy life, you
Yeah.
know. It's like we get to experience the depth, and Cahill Gibran has a beautiful poem about joy and sorrow, right? And it's the
Mhm.
self same well, right? The self same well that our tears fill with sorrow is also like fills up with our joy. and
Absolutely.
and so I think just embracing that. One of the things I wanted to end on, because I really love this. This has been a big part of my life, and I was like, "What?" When I saw it in your book, I was like, "She's good." Is Tikkun is about pretty much how to. I know this in the context of repairing the world. It's a
Yep.
Jewish word that I learned through an organization that I work with, to help do things to repair the world. But you also bring it in relation to our wounds. So you share a little bit
Yeah.
about this, because I think it's
Yeah.
a
So
beautiful.
I pronounce it. I hope I pronounce it right too. But tikkun, right? And but it's the same word, Tikkun, and it's the thing that your soul came to repair. So whether that be internally, in your case, it was with the world, right? And it is, so it's usually the lesson that you need to face, that you come across time and time again. And so maybe that's you always settle for less when you should be settling for more. And so if that's your tikkun, then your life journey will be to heal that tikkun, to repair it, to make it better.
Ooh,
And so then the klipot is the other kind of term from Jewish mysticism, which is like a shell that, let's say the shell represents all those obstacles and inside is all the light. And when you repair the tikkun, you are chopping off the shell and you're accessing more light. And so you get to then upgrade whatever next level of your destiny is, right? So on a very practical level, when you have an obstacle that comes into your life, especially one that you've hit many times before, it is a time, a moment where there is either the repairing of that tikkun internally, or the repairing of that tikkun in the world. And so for me, that was one of the most life change. It changed my life when I realized that, because I took responsibility for the fact that there was a deeper meaning, and that I could actually say, "Oh my God, this is the wound. This is the thing I came to repair." And I like took it on like a video game. I was like, "Okay, this is the one, and I gotta do this. And when I do this, I'm gonna get to heal it, and then I'm gonna access more light. Cool, upgrade. Level 11." It became more like a game of, it wasn't a game because it was hard, but yeah, a game, right? Like trials and tribulations and getting access to that next level of my destiny. And it did it did change something for me. And so I always share it with people, with my clients, with any of my retreats. It's like, this is a game changer. If you can really, look at that and see where is my cocoon, what is the lesson that keeps coming up over and over for me, and how can I repair this so that I can access that, chop off that clip pot and access the light.
Do you have an exercise or anything that you could give to someone that's trying to figure out what their Takum is?
Yeah, one question, what's the same problem that you keep coming across over and over again? So one thing you can look at is, if it's easier for you to help you pinpoint an area, maybe you can start with, your relationships or work. Start with those two and see if anything comes up for you. Where's the one that you have the most issues in, where you don't feel as much flow, where you
Yeah.
constantly feel like there's a part of you that doesn't feel worthy, good enough, or stuck in, or that there's some sort of uh, stagnation, right? Look there. There's gonna be a link, and
Yeah.
you will notice it, and that will be it. Write it down. I think my cocoon is, I have a fear of not being enough. My cocoon is, I have a fear of not being smart. My cocoon is, I have a fear of abandonment, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Um, and so owning that is going to help you to realize that there's a shell around any obstacle. Picture an obstacle, a shell. And in that shell is the light. And when you do the work, you do the heavy lifting, you get access to that light.
I love that. That's your homework. That's the homework for this
Homework.
episode.
Yeah.
Is I like to give little homework assignments. That's your homework. I want you to just journal and ask yourself, what is that wound that keeps on coming up? And I love what you said. I love using the video game analogy so much for life,
So
and because I think it's so applicable. And if you can really look at that and be like, all right, that's my biggest dragon, right? Like, now I got to slay the dragon. Now I got to really look at it. Now I got to get spiritual, strategic, use my ninja tactics on it. And I'm going to crack it open, and I'm going to get the gift that it has for me in there. And really claim that. I think also a beautiful part of thinking about that is, once again, is assuming that perhaps they're not perhaps, but that your soul wound is divinely designed, right? That is part of what your journey is supposed to be here, and that's not an accident that you're dancing with this.
yeah, and
um
I like to tell people, it's like, you know, you get, like, let's say that, the worst thing happened, right? Like, again, like I told, I wouldn't wish for any of that to happen. But if it did, right, then I'm gonna tell myself whatever I need to, in order to say, this happened. And I'm gonna believe that, if this happened to me, I better squeeze something good out of this. I better. Because if not, then whatever situation will get power, right? You want to call it the devil, the darkness,
exactly,
Satan,
yeah.
whatever, over something that I don't deserve. So it's more helpful to think in this kind of way, so we can give ourselves permission to say, you know what, I don't believe that this should have been meant to be, but this did happen to me, and so I'm gonna do whatever I can to not let this hold power over me. To not let this hold.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's, thank you for that distinction, because I do believe that that's, it's something that spiritually we can hear and be like, well, why, you're saying that, like, why would any child be born to an abusive parent or whatnot, right? But I think the reason why I share that so much is because that was such a big part of my shifting, right? Of
Yeah.
saying, hey, yeah, I wouldn't wish this on anyone else. I don't want this for other kids. I don't want this other people to experience some of the things I've had to experience in my life. But but if I say, or if I decide to sign up for the belief that
Yeah.
my soul chose this to learn something, to be able to help more people, to be able to expedite my growth process or whatever, then, like exactly what you said, it puts you back in the point of power, it gets you out of victim mode, and from that space actually allows you to heal it so much faster.
Exactly. And that's the only tiny, like, distinction that I would make, where I would tell someone, if you've experienced something, you can also say to yourself, maybe this wasn't meant to be, maybe it wasn't whatever, but it happened. And so I have to do whatever it takes. And whatever it takes is also assuming, whatever you need to in order to heal this traumatizing thing that happened. And also, one thing I mentioned in the book is like, you know, no, it shouldn't happen. And hopefully it doesn't happen. Hopefully there's better education programs for parents so that they learn how to actually do parenting well and healthy. And so we can assert responsibility where it's due, but also claim that spiritual. And so the two merge together. And I, in my path, it was very similar to that. I said, I didn't deserve for this to happen. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And so I'm going to say that it was part of my unique path to go on this journey. And I will do everything in my power for other parents and other people to not have to go through that and perpetuate the cycle again. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Christine. It's been such a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Everyone go out. I'm going to put all the links below so you can buy her beautiful I Am Diosa book, as well as stalk her all over the internet and see all the other beautiful things Christine offers. But, as a little, bow at the end of the episode, is there any message you want to leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I just want you to know how deeply worthy you are and how deeply loved you are and how deeply your soul is rooting for you. Your soul is there rooting for you, rooting for you, rooting for you.
Oh, thank you, Christine. It's an honor
Yeah.
to have you on.